supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, on a mote of dust, suspended in a sunbeam.
Hello and welcome. Today is Thursday, April the 21st, 2016. This is Paul Sandhu. I'm doing a part 2 to a video I posted last week titled Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot Proves Flat Earth with a question mark at the end. Well, the question mark was that I didn't state that that's what it was proving. I just said that the information that is readily available to us through mainstream sources, such as the video with Carl Sagan that I posted, and also through NASA and other so-called official sources, it is the very information that when it is properly analyzed, it proves, or rather it disproves something. What it disproves is the globe model of the Earth, and also this, balls that are madly spinning, rotating, moving laterally, sideways, in all directions at the same time, held together by this mysterious force called gravity, racing through space at impossible speeds, going where we don't know, and the space itself keeps expanding like a balloon being inflated infinitely. All these things, that these models, their own information can be used to disprove it. Okay, that's what I did in part 1. I disproved that the reasons that we are given for seasons on this Earth. Okay, they tell us that we have seasons because the Earth is tilted. Okay, and it was shown that that's an impossible explanation based on what they tell us is the size of the sun and the relative size of the Earth in comparison. Okay, so today I want to add, let's say, more fuel to the fire, give you some more evidence that I have come across, and some of the things that I missed in there, I want to add to that information to further strengthen the proofs that were contained in that video, that if the model of the sun, being this giant ball of fire, is incorrect, then the whole model of the solar system falls apart. And if the whole model of the solar system falls apart, then the whole model of the galaxy falls apart. And if the whole model of the galaxy falls apart, you get the point, right? That what you're living in is, what you've been taught is reality, is basically CGI, Hollywood, special effects, videography and photography, nothing more. Okay, so let's continue. Okay, so what you're looking at on the screen is a video from NASA, apparently taken in 2012 of Venus transiting across the face of the sun. Okay, this is that famous Venus transit, which you can Google, and which has been used in the past century, a couple of 100 years ago, to calculate the distance of the sun from the Earth, which is how they have arrived at that figure of 93 millions of miles. Okay. Now you'll notice something interesting. What the significance of this video is, I'm going to get to in a minute. But if you will notice something very interesting, watch that video carefully. You'll see that in the last little while, since I guess NASA's inception, Venus has become transparent because you can see the sun right through Venus. Okay, and I think I'm pretty sure that pretty soon we're going to find out that the moon actually is made of cottage cheese. Or maybe with the pock marks, it's made out of Swiss cheese. All right. So what does this video tell us? What this video shows is what I pointed out in part 1 of this video, and the link is in the description. If those who haven't watched it, I would recommend that you go back and watch that first, is the relative size of the so-called planet Venus and the sun. Venus is interesting because apparently it's about very comparable to Earth. It's called Earth's sister planet, and it is the dimensions of Venus are very close to that of the Earth. Now, when you look at that black dot transiting across the sun, do you think it's really going to matter if Venus is tilted as far as the amount of light and heat that it is going to receive from the sun? You see that massive, massive, massive ball of fire? Is it not going to hit the entire surface of Venus that is exposed to the sun side evenly? And therefore, if that is the case, what that proves is that there can be no seasons on Venus. Okay, so that from top to bottom, everywhere, Venus is going to be receiving the same amount of light and the same amount of heat from the sun. And this video looks sort of two-dimensional. Okay, so you can't really fully comprehend the significance of what we are seeing. But if you could think three-dimensional, or you take two balls, for example, take a basketball and take a little golf ball, okay? And you put that little golf ball in front of the basketball or a big beach ball. Okay, so when you do that, what becomes obvious is that it doesn't matter where in relation to that big beach ball that little golf ball is going to be, or little ping pong ball. The energy from that giant sphere, which in this case would be the sun, is radiating 360 in every direction. So no matter where you put that ball, it is going to, whatever side is facing that massive body, it is going to receive an equal amount of sunlight and an equal amount of heat. So how's that significant? Well, it's significant because the same thing applies to the Earth. The Earth is only 25 million miles away from Venus. So again, in a cosmic scale, Earth is very much in the neighborhood. And being that it is very relatively similar in size and mass, etc., to Venus, what applies to Venus as you're watching it transit across the face of the sun, allegedly, also applies to the Earth. That if the Earth is moving across the face of this massive body, and is doing that 24/7, 365 days a year, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, millennia after millennia, that same pattern is being repeated. It doesn't matter how the Earth is tilted, if it's upside down or if it's sideways, or where you place it in relation to the sun. They call this the ecliptic. This is where the planets are. It doesn't matter if they're on the ecliptic or not, no matter where you place it, from pole to pole, suppose these alleged poles, the same amount of light and heat is going to hit the Earth, which means the Earth should not have seasons. Okay, so what you're looking at, that Venus transit, just picture the Earth instead of that. It's the same thing will happen. Now, I'm also going to play another video from NASA, which of course was not produced in any kind of studio. You know, it's been taken by stereo satellite B, which is on the dark side, the far side of the sun, of a big solar flare, okay? And what these solar flares will again prove something to us. It'll strengthen the argument that I'm making here, that if the sun is this real massive body with the volume that it can contain 103 million Earths, get that through your head, that the volume of the sun, they tell us, is so big that it can fit 103 million. No, I didn't say 103 Earths. I said 103 million Earths. If the sun really is this massive body, there is no possible way that the amount of energy from the sun is concentrated between, let's say, south of 60 degrees latitude north and north of 60 degrees latitude south. That is where the majority of the sun's light and heat, I'll put a map up on the screen for you to look at, that it is concentrated there. Okay? That is why they say we have these ice caps, that beyond 60 degrees north and beyond 60 degrees south is basically winter all year long. And not just winter, it is like, frozen tundra all year long. That is not possible with this massive, massive, massive sun that you're looking at in this video and the next one, which is of a giant solar flare as recorded apparently and allegedly by NASA's deep space satellites. Okay, so here on the screen again is another video from NASA about this massive solar flare that erupted again, I think back in 2012. And what's interesting about these solar flares, I'll put an image of the Earth to the left of this video. And what that shows you that these solar flares apparently, especially the X-class flares, they're so big that first of all, they are many, many times the width of the Earth. Okay? And they travel at light speed, of course, and it takes only about 8 minutes for it to get from the sun to here. But if such a solar flare, when it erupts, we hear these horror stories of things that can happen, such as all electronics can go down, etc., etc. But the point is that when this kind of a solar flare, or even a M-class, which is like, not as big as an X-class, when it erupts, it shoots out again at light speed and in any direction, whichever direction, if it happens to be pointing towards the Earth, for example, it'll reach the Earth within a matter of minutes. But it's not going to have dissipated by the time it gets to the Earth. It'll be, because it is many, many times the width of the Earth, it is going to envelop the whole Earth and go beyond it, right? So what this video is showing us is, I want you to forget about the solar flare for a minute, is that what is happening with this flare is also applicable to the energy that is coming from the sun itself. Okay, the sun is putting out this massive amounts of energy. It is headed towards the Earth at every second of every day of every year of all time. So this massive amount of ocean of energy is being blasted towards the Earth all of the time, like these solar flares. And because the sun is so much bigger than the Earth, they tell us, the only logical explanation that is left to us is that this amount of energy, it has to envelop the Earth. It is like many, 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 many hundreds, possibly millions of times wide as the Earth itself. So like Carl Sagan said, that the Earth is only a mote of dust caught in a beam of sunlight. That is the only logical explanation if the sun is the size they claim it is. Okay. So if that is the case truly, and it cannot be the case because that's not what we see happening here, then there should be enough energy that it should envelop the Earth, and the Earth, whatever side is facing the sun, should be evenly hit with light and heat simultaneously, 24 for that period of time, 12 hours that it'll be facing the sun before it disappears. It'll have an even amount of heat and light from all the way from the North Pole to the South Pole. Okay, which means there should be no difference in the temperature at the North Pole or the South Pole, or in between. It should pretty much be the same everywhere. That's what should happen if the Earth is so small in comparison to the Earth that it is only a mote of dust caught in a beam of sunlight. Okay, even at the expense of beating a dead horse, let's turn back to Mr. Bill Nye and have him explain the tilt and the reasons for the alleged reasons for the seasons that we have on Earth. And by the way, I want to make a comment here. The seasons and weather are two different things. Seasons is like when you have winter. Winter can have variations in weather. Summer can have variations in weather, whereas one summer can be very hot and very cold. And weather is dependent on like the movement of the winds and the currents and other factors. Seasons, however, are dependent, as we are told, in the relative positions of the Earth and the Sun. So seasons and weather are two different things.
Do you notice, though, that the axis about which the Earth turns is not straight up and down. It's tilted to one side at an angle of 23.5 degrees from the perpendicular. This has a lot to do with why we have different seasons, as we shall see.
Let's say that this plastic globe of science is like the Earth, and we have two solar panels mounted on it. Now, solar panels convert light directly into electricity. So right now, these two panels are making enough electricity to run these two little motors. Now right now, both motors are going about the same speed. Now notice that we have one panel in the northern half of the Earth, the northern hemisphere, and one panel in the southern half of the Earth, the southern hemisphere. They're both receiving about the same amount of light. But let's say it's summer here at Nye Laboratories in the northern half of the Earth, the northern hemisphere. That means that the Earth would be tipped toward the sun about like now look, the motor in the southern hemisphere is just barely moving, while the motor in the northern hemisphere is spinning like crazy. Now let's say it's 6 months later, and the Earth has gone around the sun so that its axis is tipped this way. Now look, it's reversed. The one in the south is going wild, and the one in the north is slowed way down. See, what that means is that this panel in the southern hemisphere is receiving more light, more energy from the sun than the one in the northern hemisphere. It's just like the Earth's seasons, right here with the solar panel plastic globe of science.
Using a flashlight, you can see for yourself that direct rays are concentrated on a smaller area than slanted rays. This is why direct rays produce more heat.
Okay, so this graphic here on the screen, it shows us the relative size of the place where apparently the sun's energy is mostly concentrated on Earth. And this is correct, because that is exactly what we observe ourselves, that let's say between 60-65 degrees latitude, north or south, beyond that, it's very, very cold. So obviously those are the areas that get very little heat from the sun, and also less light as well, because there's many months in the winter, you know, if you go to Alaska, north of there, in the Arctic Circle, for example, you hardly have any sun. And that is an observed and known fact. It's indisputable that this is how things really are on our Earth. So the commonly accepted explanation for this phenomenon, that most of the sun's energy on our Earth is concentrated below 65 degrees latitude north and above 65 degrees latitude south, that the regions beyond those latitudes, they are pretty much in a state of winter, which means they're receiving very little energy from the sun all year long. And we are told that is because of the tilt, and that causes less energy to be dispersed over those areas. Okay. However, that explanation only works if the sun is smaller than the Earth, much smaller. Okay, to test the veracity of what I'm claiming here, let's look at this image on the screen once again, which shows the relative size of the sun and of the Earth. And let's go back again and revisit that video from Venus transit across the face of the sun. Let's look again at that video. I'm not going to play them again, but you can go back and look at them again, of NASA's solar flare video, for example. And this image, of course, is taken from that solar flare video. And you can see that even the size of that flare is like multiple times the size of the Earth. Okay. The diameter of the sun is like 109 times the diameter of the Earth. So when these objects are so disproportionate in size, then it doesn't matter how this one object, which is the Earth in this case, is going to be facing the sun. No matter what angle it's facing it at, Whether it's tilted on its axis or not, like how do you determine an axis anyways, okay, on a sphere, is very subjective. But it doesn't really matter how it's tilted. Whatever size is going to face the sun, it is going to be evenly lit and it is going to be evenly heated, okay? And again, you can look at that graphic again. I'll put it on the screen here of the mote of dust in a beam of sunlight from Carl Sagan, and that allegedly is an actual photograph. And if it allegedly is an actual photograph, then you can see very clearly that the Earth is just like a speck of dust, and the sunbeams, the width of the sunbeam is so much bigger in comparison. For anybody to claim this direct versus indirect energy when we're talking about these scales is it's a ridiculous proposition at best, and a completely insane one in reality. I'm going to conclude this this presentation, by revisiting what I had first presented in part 1, the explanation that has been given to us for a long time now, that seasons on Earth are not a factor of the distance of the sun from the Earth, but rather because of the Earth's tilt. And one more time, we shall see that there are major problems with this explanation.
You basically have 4 seasons: spring, summer, fall, and winter. Plants bloom in the spring, it gets hot in the summer, trees lose their leaves in the fall, and it gets cold in the winter. But why? Why does this happen? Oh, it's because Earth is closer to the sun in the summer, right? Oh, no. Actually, here at 42 degrees north latitude, we're further away from the sun in the summer. 3.3% further away. Wrap your mind around that. So why is it so much colder in the winter? Because the Earth is tilted. It doesn't really matter how far away the tilt has moved us from the sun either. Again, at 42 degrees north latitude, I'm only tilted about 2,100 miles further away from the sun in the winter. That might seem like a lot, but the Earth is 93 million miles from the sun. So 2,100 miles is only about 2/1000ths of a percent, which is much less than the 3.3% we get from orbiting the sun. And we already said that didn't matter.
Okay, so let me finish by posing a few questions for the experts. Number 1, the alleged axial tilt of the Earth changes the angle that any given location on Earth faces the sun by a minuscule percentage, 0.002% in the case of 42 degrees north latitude. Yet the sun's position in relation to the Earth changes by a massive 3.3%. What kind of science is this that ignores the much bigger variable and bases its conclusions solely on the one insignificant and much smaller variable? Number 2, NASA videos such as that of the Venus transit and the solar flare eruptions which I showed you, and Carl Sagan's pale blue dot photo reveal the reported relative size of the sun and of the Earth. If the sun truly is such a massive body, how can there be any area on Earth, as on Venus, that would not receive almost the exact same amount of heat and light from the sun as every other area on the Earth? Okay, number 3. The relative size of the sun and of the Earth can never change, no matter how close or how far apart they are. If the sun is 109 times the diameter of the Earth, and its volume is so gigantic that it can fit 109 million Earths, and it produces so much energy that even an M-class flare is hundreds of times the width of the Earth and can travel for hundreds of millions of miles, how do we in reality observe a much more limited amount of energy of the sun's light and heat reaching us? How can we reconcile the reported relative size of these two objects and the reported amount of energy produced by the sun with the fact that some 1/3 of the Earth receives almost no heat or light from the sun for a significant part of the year? Number 4, gravity. Changing the moon's distance from the Earth is the alleged reason for the ocean's tides. Yet there is no gravitational effect whatsoever when the largest mass in the so-called solar system, which is 99.86% of the solar system's total mass, namely the sun, moves a massive 3.3% or comes 3 million miles closer to the Earth at certain times of the year. What kind of magic is this gravity that a puny little object like the moon can move massive bodies of water like the Pacific Ocean, but the sun moving closer or further away from the Earth has no effect on it whatsoever? What kind of science is this when a significant variable whose inclusion would alter the conclusion or the outcome of the equation significantly is simply ignored or dismissed with a shrug of the shoulders, a wave of the hands, and a loud exclamation, "We already said it doesn't matter"? Lastly, what the following graphic shows, and as Bill Nye's heat lamp video from part 1 to this video showed, when it suits the experts, they reduce the size of the sun to be a fraction of the size of the Earth, as in their explanation for seasons. There are thousands of diagrams in Google showing the official explanation for seasons on Earth, yet the majority of them show the sun to be smaller or just about the same size as the Earth. Ask Mr. Bill Nye or Mr. Science Asylum or any physicist or astrophysicist you might know to draw a diagram to scale explaining these seasons. Make the sun 109 times in diameter as the Earth when you draw these diagrams, and then expect your students to believe your magical tilt theory for the explanation of the seasons on Earth. Okay, so let me finish by showing you a very common diagram for the explanation of seasons that you will find on Google. As you can see in this diagram, in the middle we have Mr. Sun. Except in this case, the sun is, of course, shown to be smaller than the Earth. In some diagrams, it's a little bit bigger. In some, it's about the same size. But none of these diagrams are ever to scale. See that graphic that I showed you, which I'll show you again right here, of the relative size of the sun and of the Earth, which we also saw in that alleged Venus video. The sun is so massive that if you drew a diagram to scale, the only way to do it would be that you would basically have the Earth as a dot. Okay, that's it. Now, if you take this diagram that you're looking at and you replace the sun with these circles to a small dot, like the pale blue dot of Mr. Carl Sagan, tell me, are you really going to believe that it's the tilt that is going to cause seasons? That tilting it this way, that way, upside down, backwards, forwards is going to make any difference as to the amount of sunlight and heat that the Earth is going to receive from the sun? Of course it wouldn't. So these explanations only work when they are done with phony diagrams, with phony examples, when variables are ignored that should be taken into account, when observations that we make with our own eyes are discounted in order to prove some theory which is not even good enough to be classified as a theory, is hardly good enough to be called a hypothesis. So the doctrine, the mantra, must be maintained at all costs. And what is the cost? The cost, of course, is the truth. In my next part, I will get into the explanations of how seasons really work, which is actually a very simple, explanation. Basically, number one, that the sun is smaller than the Earth. Like this diagram shows you, this is a correct diagram in many ways, except for the spinning Earth part. But the sun is smaller than the Earth. That is the only reason why many areas of the Earth do not receive any light or heat, almost none, and the other parts are not evenly heated and lit. Okay, so the sun is smaller, it's closer to the Earth, it is smaller than the Earth, and that is the only reason why we have seasons on our Earth. Thank you for listening. This is Paul Sandhu.
Beside the sea, let your heart take courage. Oh, don't walk in fear. The Spirit is descending. God is ever near. Is everywhere. Beside the sea.